He spent 10 years trapped inside his own body, conscious, paralyzed, listening, and when he finally got his life back, he came back with a plan, not to survive, to destroy every single person who put him there. Kim Yunsung wasn't always a threat. He was the quiet kid, the one people look through, never at. Average grades, no connections, no money, no backup. The kind of student who just wanted to graduate without incident. But incident had a way of finding him anyway. At his school, a guy named Park Mitchell ran the whole social food chain. Loud, cruel, untouchable, the kind of bully who performed his cruelty like entertainment. One day Mitchell cornered a chubby kid in front of the whole class. Made him kneel, made him smell his shoe, made sure everyone watched. Yunsung froze at his desk. Not from fear, from something else entirely. Because this wasn't the first time he'd seen this moment. He'd lived it before. And in that other life, the one he just came back from watching it happen, was how everything started to go wrong. Here's what you need to understand about Yunsung's backstory. In his previous life, the bullying never stopped, it escalated. Mitchell and his crew tormented him for years while teachers looked the other way. Until one day, they stopped looking away and started looking down from a rooftop. They threw him off the building. He survived the fall, barely. But the damage was catastrophic. He slipped into a vegetative coma. Conscious. Unable to speak. He heard everything happening around him, but he couldn't respond to any of it. His grandmother came every single day. She prayed beside his bed, held his hand, refused to let the doctors pull the plug. His brother visited sometimes too, and over time the updates got worse. Mitchell's crew had shifted their attention to the younger brother. Yunsung lay there, hearing all of it, unable to do a single thing. 10 years passed that way. 10 years of being awake inside a dead body, replaying every detail, every face, every humiliation, every adult who could have stopped it and chose not to. His brain couldn't hold it anymore. He died in that hospital bed from the weight of it all, and then impossibly he woke up back in the classroom. Same day, same scene, Mitchell the shoe, the kid on the floor. Like the universe had hit rewind. Yunsung looked down at his hands, then stabbed his leg with a mechanical pencil just to check. The pain was real. So was the opportunity. He stood up slowly, walked to the front of the class and said one word: stop. Mitchell thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. The nobody. Telling him what to do. He barely had time to form a smirk before Yunsung hit him full force, no hesitation. Not a shove, not a warning shot. A hit carrying 10 years of helpless rage. Mitchell's head snapped sideways. The room went silent. Nobody had ever seen anything like it, not from him. But Yunsung didn't stop. He grabbed Mitchell by the hair, slammed his face into the desk, and just kept going. Every memory of his grandmother kneeling on a hospital floor, every year his body wouldn't obey him, all of it came out through his fists. Mitchell's crew arrived to drag him off. Kang Chang-suk, the biggest of the bunch, fronting hard. A teacher, rushing toward the classroom, was the only reason they paused. Mitchell, still barely upright, promised consequences. Yunsung just looked at him, no fear, no hesitation, and waited. Because he already knew what came next. He'd lived the wrong version of it once. After class, Mitchell's crew came looking for him. They expected to find him hiding. Instead, they found him calmly cleaning up the classroom. He looked up, told them they were late, and reached for a metal padlock. Kang Chang-seok charged in like a freight train. Yunsung swung the padlock and put him on the floor before he got halfway there. He didn't wait to see if Chang-seok was breathing. He moved to the next one. Jo Young-tae went down from a single dive tackle, then a sequence of punches that left his face unrecognizable. By the time Yunsung looked up, young Minho, the crew's real shot caller, was shaking. Minho had never seen someone fight like this. Calculated, cold, like it had all been rehearsed. It had been for 10 years inside his own skull. Yunsung walked toward him. Minho's legs gave out. Only a teacher appearing in the doorway saved him from finding out what came next. But the teacher wasn't there to protect Yunsung. He dragged him to the staff room and started listing punishments. Property damage, endangering students, the price the rich families involved would make them pay. Yunsung let him finish, then he smiled. I know you take money from Minho's family every month, he said quietly. I know about the English teacher too, the one with 3 kids. Want me to keep going? The teacher's face drained of color. Cover this up, Yunsung told him. Like you always do, except this time you cover it up for me. The teacher slapped him across the face. Instinct, panic. The other teachers in the room turned back to their desks and pretended not to notice. Which was exactly what Yunsung expected, exactly what he'd planned for, because in his previous life, this teacher had been the one who sealed his fate. He'd watched the beating happen with his own eyes and walked away. He accepted bribes from Minho's parents routinely. When Yunsung had tried going through official channels the first time, this man buried it. So Yunsung wasn't asking for justice through the system. He was using the system's own rot as leverage. He left the teacher with one clear message: protect me until graduation, or your life falls apart. Minho's parents were furious. His mother personally showed up to the school demanding Yunsung be expelled. She had money, she had lawyers, she had years of experience getting her son out of trouble. What she didn't have was a read on what was about to walk through the disciplinary committee's door. Yunsung had spent his coma years listening to television news every day, just to keep his mind from completely collapsing. One story in particular had stuck with him. The eldest son of the Kang group, Go Changbom, had been arrested for assaulting a civilian. The real story was messier. His younger brother, Go Chang-suk, had orchestrated the whole thing, a setup designed to torpedo Changbom's chance at inheriting the company. Changbom was stuck at the police station with no evidence, no witnesses and no alibi, until a high school student appeared beside him and calmly said, "I'm here as his witness." Yunsung had tracked down dashcam footage from a nearby parked car before the arrest even happened. The footage showed the other men loitering in the area 30 minutes before the fight, proving they were waiting for Changbom to show up, and deliberately provoked him. The police had no choice. Changbom walked free, and Yunsung walked into his future with the most powerful backer in Daesan City standing right behind him. Changbom was the kind of man who laughed at impossible things until they actually happened. A high school kid with a silver tongue and a dashcam clip had just saved his succession bid. He pulled out a thick roll of cash on the spot, grateful, generous, a little embarrassed. Yunsung didn't even glance at it. That composure was what made Changbom stop laughing and start listening. Over coffee, Yunsung laid out the truth. The setup was deliberate, and his brother was behind it. Changbom's expression shifted from skeptical to unsettled, to something quieter and colder. Yunsung told him what he needed to win the succession race, and it wasn't money or charm. His younger brother Changsuk had the degree, the marriage connections, the corporate experience. Changbom had exactly one advantage: he was his eldest and their father was old-fashioned. So the play was simple: drag Changsuk back to the starting line, expose the mistress, destroy the marriage alliance, strip away the thing his brother built his whole edge on. Changbom gambled. He said yes. Not long after, Changsuk's wife found the address of a secret villa. Then she found the mistress and gave her a memorable welcome. The scandal hit the Go family like a wrecking ball. Their father, Gung Jin, was furious not because the news got out, but because a son of his had been careless enough to get caught. In a room with both brothers, he praised Changbom for avoiding conflict during the police incident. Changsuk nearly bit through his own jaw holding back his reaction. The succession race had shifted, and neither brother fully understood why. Yunsung, coaching from a distance, told Changbom to stop the playboy act and start from the bottom at the company. Changbom made a face, then he agreed. "Whatever you say," he told the high schooler who had somehow become the most useful person in his life. In exchange, Yunsung named his condition not money, not influence. He wanted Changbom to serve as his legal guardian at school, and to clean up messes, whatever messes came. Changbom said yes without blinking. A week later, Yunsung stood before the school disciplinary committee. Minho's mother had already slapped the homeroom teacher, and promised his job if he didn't vote for expulsion. The teacher was genuinely completely trapped until he saw who walked in as Yunsung's guardian. Go Changbom, the eldest son of the Kang group, a man whose last name made principals sweat. The teacher's loyalty switched directions so fast it was almost comical. He testified in the committee that Minho had been the aggressor, that Yunsung had only acted in self-defense. The principal, who'd been ready to rubber stamp an expulsion, suddenly heard the words Kang group and recalculated everything. Minho's mother exploded. She called her husband. He told her to come home immediately. There would be no backing Minho in front of the Kang group's heir. The committee sentenced Yunsung to 100 hours of community service. Minho was expelled. As Minho lunged in desperation, Yunsung stopped him with 2 words: "Kneel, beg." Minho looked to his mother looked away, and young Minho, the terror of 3 school years, dropped to his knees in front of the whole room. But Yunsung wasn't finished. He was just getting started. Park Mitchell, still enrolled, still dangerous, sent a message asking to meet. He showed up nervous, complimenting, already trying to smooth things over. Yunsung cut him off before he finished a sentence. Mitchell begged for mercy, offered to be useful, and then dropped something unexpected. A hidden force had actually given the order for him to bully Yunsung specifically. They weren't just random cruelty. Someone had paid for it. Yunsung already suspected something like this. During his coma years, he'd caught a news story about a student who jumped from a building, and the suicide note named an organization called the Golden Circle. The Golden Circle was a business built on other people's pain. Wealthy, powerful parents commissioned them to destroy high-achieving students who threatened their children's academic rankings. In exchange, they received protection, grade manipulation, and silence. The circle recruited dominant students at schools, turned them into enforcers, and kept the whole machine running invisibly. Mitchell didn't know who the actual client was. That information was never shared with street-level enforcers. But he gave up the name that mattered: Shin Youngmin. Senior, aspiring professional fighter, the circle's gateway into the school. Yunsung filed that name away, slapped Mitchell hard across the face, and told him to carry that scar for the rest of his life. Then he went home where his grandmother waited up, horrified by the bruises on his face. He told her it was a school thing, sorted out now. He mentioned casually that Kang Group had a new housing project, she should go apply for a spot. She didn't need to know the 100 million won he was about to transfer had come from Chang Bom. The next item on Yunsung's list, his body. He'd spent 10 years with a mind that had been planning, but a body that had been lying in a hospital bed. He needed real physical capability and he knew exactly who to go to. Young Dushul had once been Korea's first world champion in mixed martial arts. He ran a small ignored gym and hadn't competed in years. His career had ended after a failed drug test following a title fight, a moment he'd never explained and never defended. Yunsung walked in, looked at him, and offered 100 million won up front for personal training. Duchul told him if he was just there to learn how to hurt people, he wasn't interested. Yunsung pointed out that Dushul had made his own choice, taken drugs to win, and accepted the consequences. I'm making mine, Yunsung said. I'm prepared to end up crippled or jailed, I need your help. Duchul offered a trial, survive 3 minutes in the ring with him, and he'd consider it. What followed was not a fight, it was a dismantling. Duchul's first punch shattered through Yunsung's guard and collapsed him in 10 seconds. He got up again. A vicious low kick numbed his entire leg. He got up again. A liver shot, the kind that can make a grown man vomit and faint simultaneously, sent his body into uncontrollable shaking. His muscles refused to obey. His brain screamed at them to move. He thought about 10 years of lying in that hospital bed, wishing for death. He stood up. Duchul threw everything he had at this kid, full professional power, no restraint. The timer saved Yunsung from the edge of unconsciousness. Dushul looked at the broken, swollen, still standing boy and swore under his breath. He'd seen a lot of fighters, he'd never seen willpower like that. He sent his bank account information before Yunsung even made it home. That night, his grandmother nearly cried at the sight of his face. He smiled, sat down for dinner and asked about bank books. Meanwhile, Shin Youngmin, the circle's school enforcer, needed to move on Yunsung. He sent his crew to isolate Yunsung, warning everyone that anyone seen with him would become a target. Park Jin-woo, Yunsung's closest childhood friend, heard the warning and came anyway. In a previous timeline, Jin-woo had defended Yunsung and had his leg broken as a punishment. After the break, he'd pulled away. He'd come to the hospital during the coma and apologized quietly to a boy who couldn't hear him. If there's a next life, he'd said, I won't leave you alone again. This was the next life and he meant it. Yunsung tried to push him away, told him to ignore him, keep his head down, stay out of it. Jin-woo ignored him completely. He hadn't even gotten to make his case when Yunsung heard through classmates that Jin-woo had been dragged into a bathroom. The crew had him cornered, payback for not following the isolation order. Jin-woo wasn't backing down. He threw the first punch himself. He was outnumbered and taking a beating when Yunsung kicked the bathroom door open. To deal with the crew's numbers, Yunsung did what he'd done before, provoked the leader into a one-on-one, called him names, questioned his muscle-to-brain ratio, let the guy's ego do the work. The leader charged in, furious and predictable. Yunsung stayed mobile, struck repeatedly until the guy couldn't stand, and left him on the floor. He told the crew that if they touched Jin-woo again, he'd come for all of them personally. Then he turned around and told Jin-woo to stay out of his business. Jin-woo grabbed his hand and refused. Yunsung finally laid it out directly. This wasn't accidents. This wasn't random. He was the one picking these fights, deliberately, systematically. He was going to wipe out every bully in the school, and possibly beyond it. If Jin-woo stayed close, he'd keep getting caught in the crossfire. Jin-woo smiled, he'd already decided. Yunsung moved on to the next target, Shin Youngmin himself. He walked directly into Youngmin's classroom, called him out by name with a word too rude to repeat, and threw a kick before any conversation could happen. Youngmin was fast enough to block, but the sheer aggression had him off balance. They exchanged strikes in the room, desks getting knocked aside. Yunsung used a chair as a weapon, which Youngmin found absurd until a heavy blow crunched into his core and he coughed blood. Young was stronger, more technically skilled. The gap was real. Yunsung knew it. He wasn't there to win cleanly. He was there to establish something and to set up one specific moment. He grabbed Youngmin's leg, used every ounce of his weight, and hurled both of them toward the window. Top floor, open air below. Youngmin caught the ledge with shaking hands, dangling, staring down. Yunsung looked over the edge at him, eyes wide and calm as still water. Either you die today or I do, he said quietly. Youngmin survived, but from that moment forward he was terrified of Kim Yunsung. Yunsung leaned close and whispered that this wasn't finished. The moment Young touched anyone connected to him, Yunsung would come back for his skull. The school's administration tried to spin it. Youngmin's back injury was ruled a fall, nothing to do with Yunsung. The homeroom teacher warned Youngmin to keep quiet or have his past exposed. Youngmin had no good moves left. He lowered his head. But not for long. The Golden Circle sent an intermediary Cho Taijun, who reached out to Young Min with a final ultimatum. Either drag Yunsung's grades down before the semester ended or pay a brutal personal price. Young Min, desperate, tried organizing a mass confrontation recruit enough students to overwhelm Yunsung in a place the school couldn't ignore. The plan fell apart immediately. Yunsung, outnumbered heavily, dared them to come at him one by one. His taunt-worked ego killed the strategy. Each bully who stepped up got put down, one after the next, until the second-year boss personally stepped in. They traded blows straight, no dodging, no positioning. The boss thought the size difference would decide it. Yunsung took hits and kept swinging until he grabbed the boss by the hair and drove his face into the ground. By the time the boss was unconscious, the rest of the crew was too afraid to move. But Young Min's actual scheme was still in motion. The police were called by students, not administrators. The Education Bureau called the principal directly. All of it went nowhere, because Changbom's deal with the school had already insulated Yunsung completely. The principal dismissed every complaint. The police declared it a false report. Young Min watched his plan evaporate and started considering going after Yunsung himself. Then his father called, voice shaking, ordering him to leave Yunsung alone. Changbom had located the loan company holding Young Min's father's debt and offered them a partnership with Kang Group on an upcoming project. The loan sharks were thrilled. They handed over the contracts. Changbom called Young Min personally to explain what his family's financial future now looked like. Young Min showed up to school the next day, beaten looking, having accepted the terms. Yunsung was waiting. He gave Young Min a choice: kneel and beg or go all out and risk everything. Young Min, with the whole school watching, couldn't stay rational. He swung hard, furious, precise, actually dangerous. Yunsung had watched every one of Young Min's amateur fight recordings, had analyzed each one with dual. He knew the tells: the exposed jaw when excited, hook counter, the wide footwork signaling a power finish. He dodged sideways and landed a clean punch to the face. Then he caught Young Min's shoulders with his legs, twisted his arm, and pulled until something snapped. The sound carried across the entire campus. The students watching went cold. Yunsung stood over him and leaned down to whisper one more thing. The next chance he got, he'd be back for more. Young Min would spend the rest of his days looking over his shoulder. In the weeks that followed, Yunsung's midterm results came back perfect scores in every subject. Not near perfect, not impressive for circumstances, perfect. The classroom beauty, OG, checked his answers first and couldn't hide her reaction. The whole class crowded around. The room went silent. The principal's phone rang off the hook from parent complaints, demanding to know if Yunsung had cheated. He hadn't. He'd simply remembered everything, every test, every question, every answer from the first time around. The principal didn't care how it happened. He saw a path to national ranking and started dreaming. With perfect scores and Kang Group money behind the school, his reputation dreams could finally become real. He told the homeroom teacher to keep Yunsung on track at any cost and handed him a bonus for his cooperation. Meanwhile, Yunsung called the teacher to the rooftop and explained calmly what the Golden Circle actually was. He watched the man's face go through several different shades of panic. "No matter what I do," Yunsung said, "you keep your hands off, that's all I ask." The teacher nodded and immediately started dreading whatever was coming. What was coming was a month of hell for Young Min specifically. Yunsung gathered his classmates and listed every documented thing Young Min had done to people in that room. Then he announced for 1 month, Young Min would not fight back against anyone. Nobody was forced, but anyone Young Min had wronged was free to act. One student, Han Young-hun, who had once been too scared to make eye contact with Young Min, went first. He walked up and dumped an entire carton of milk over Young Min's head. That broke the dam. One by one, everyone Young Min had bullied came forward. They mocked him with his own words, tripped him at doors, surrounded him in the bathroom. Young Min shook with rage the entire month, telling himself to endure 1 month, then it's over. He was still clinging to that thought when a text message arrived offering him a way out. Yunsung's instructions led Young Min to 3 former bullies who had dropped out, including Park Mitchell. Without Yunsung lifting a finger, Young Min beat them all bloody in a convenience store. One of the dropouts, cornered and desperate, stabbed Young Min from behind. Both of them ended up confessing to police, begging to be locked up, saying they never wanted to see Daesun again. The next day, the school was buzzing. Yunsung had made them destroy each other without ever touching either one. He told Changbom to make sure all 4 of them cycled back to prison every time they got out. Changbom stared at him for a long moment. "I never want to be your enemy," he said. Yunsung turned his attention to OG, the school's top female student, cheerful and well-liked. She'd been showing interest in him for months, and he'd been carefully tracking her behavior. He'd already narrowed his suspects list for the Golden Circle client down to 3 people. Through a series of deliberately planted information, different lies told to different suspects, he was able to identify which story reached the Golden Circle first. OG was the one who'd commissioned the circle, she was the client. She had grown up, with every advantage: money, looks, social status, effortless success. Yunsung was the first person who'd ever rejected her. She'd confessed her feelings, he'd turned her down not unkindly, but absolutely. She hadn't been able to handle it, and instead of moving on, she'd paid a criminal organization to make his life unlivable. Yunsung locked them both in a room together and told her exactly what he knew. When her cover broke, she dropped the act, accused him of leading her on, said she just wanted him to understand despair. He grabbed her by the hair, his voice went flat. "I turned you down because I couldn't afford what you can buy on a whim," he said. "Not because I didn't care, but that doesn't matter anymore." He promised to tear her life apart methodically. Her father, Oh Chun-am, a powerful man, arrived to see his daughter's condition and immediately threatened to destroy Funsung and Changbom. The Golden Circle's intermediary, cornered by Yunsung beforehand, had already handed over all evidence of the deal. Yunsung visited Oh Cham's home personally, sat down on his sofa and offered two choices: call the police and every record of the bribery, the Circle Commission, and the evidence gets released. Or don't, and Yunsung makes no promises about what comes next for his daughter. He tossed a knife on the floor in front of the man. "There's a third option," he said, "you can use that." Then he walked out without looking back. OG fled from her own father that night. The madness she saw in his eyes had nothing to do with Yunsung. Oh Chun-am was calculating whether his daughter was worth more than his legacy. He decided she wasn't. Through all of this, Yunsung was working a longer play. The Golden Circle's intermediary, Young Chan-soo, had been turned into Yunsung's mole. He sent false reports up the chain, claiming the assignment had been completed successfully. The Circle believed it for now. Yunsung had also been recruiting political protection, approaching Congressman Kim Pan-ho, a career politician with his eye on a presidential run. Pan-ho was under attack from within his own party. Someone was using opposition members to fire at him sideways. Yunsung mapped out exactly who was pulling those cases, predicted a drug scandal involving foreign students before it happened, and handed Pan-ho the tools to turn the attack back on his enemies. Was suspicious, amused and deeply interested. When Yunsung told him he could make him president by destroying the Golden Circle publicly, and that he'd need political cover to survive long enough to do it, Pan-ho listened to the whole plan before answering. "If you fail even once," he said, "I'll drop you immediately and erase all evidence you existed. If you can handle that, I'm in." Yunsung nodded. He'd expected exactly that answer. At Dukel's gym, Yunsung trained through the winter like someone trying to compress years into months. 5 a.m. runs, back to strict sessions, 5 meals a day to force physical growth. He pushed far past safe limits, his body showing signs of serious strain that he refused to acknowledge. Dushul noticed, so did Park Jin-woo, who had since joined the gym himself. Jin-woo had walked in with money from a part-time job and a face still healing from a fight, and told Dushul that Yunsung had saved his life, and he wasn't going to abandon him now. Dushul let him train. Yunsung tried to keep Jin-woo at a distance, told him the path ahead was too dangerous, too consuming. Jin-woo put on a pair of gloves and told him to prove it. Yunsung knocked him down and kept swinging, ordering him to give up. Jin-woo just laughed, kept getting hit, kept refusing, never stopped smiling. Yunsung finally stopped. He asked. Jin-woo told him the truth. "You were the only light in a world I couldn't find a way through. I'm not leaving." By the end of winter break, their skill level had climbed to something Dushul could barely measure. In Seoul, at a demonstration Dushul had arranged, Jin-woo knocked out a professional fighter in under 1 round. Then he beat a second one, a distance specialist, by trapping him in a submission hold and refusing to let go. The crowd in that room, full of martial arts insers, went quiet in a way that meant something. Dushul was then challenged by a rival coach who sent his best student, a pre-debut prospect nicknamed Dynamite. Yunsung stepped into the ring instead of Jin-woo. He abandoned his calculated style midway through and just attacked relentless, non-stop, accepting damage to create opportunities. He knocked Dynamite down with a hook and kept going until the referee stopped it. Dushul called him over afterward and simply said, "Thank you for keeping your promise." Yunsung thanked him back with the same quiet sincerity and told him he was done. Fighting wasn't the goal, it was always a means to an end. Back in Daesun, Yunsung was expanding his territory in a different direction. He'd created an anonymous forum page where bullying victims could report incidents and request help. Jo Jin, the school's self-described loudmouth, managed it. Reports came in from every school in the district. Yunsung's crew, with the third-year former bullies, now under his direction, after Kong Byung-ho switched sides for scholarship, money began moving through each school systematically. The method was consistent. Identify the aggressor. Respond with force. Leave a clear message. Byung-ho had been recruited in the most straightforward way possible. Yunsung paid him to take a beating, called it a test of loyalty, then transferred 5 million won and promised more. Byung-ho announced to the third-year bullies that Yunsung was now their god, and compliance was financially rewarded. Most of them agreed on the spot. The holdouts changed their minds after Byung-ho demonstrated what disagreement looked like. At the same time, Yunsung took on private tutoring work brought in by Lee Miso, a powerful parent forum moderator. Her son and a group of elite Gangnam students were his pupils. They showed up the first day planning to ditch class and fire him. Yunsung tracked them to a club, walked in, slapped the ringleader, and told them to call their parents if they had a problem. The parents on speaker told their children to listen to the teacher. Half a month later, every student's grade had jumped a full tier. Lee Miso offered 10 million won per student per month and a bonus if scores improved again. Yunsung accepted not for the money, but because one of those students was the son of a deputy chief prosecutor. He was quietly building a legal foundation around himself. Changbom's involvement in the company had also changing. Yunsung had told him to start from the bottom at King Group's construction sites. On one of those sites, a concrete pour collapsed, workers were buried, and the foreman wanted to cover it up. Changbom grabbed him by the collar and ordered every rescue team in the area to respond immediately. He then authorized a complete rebuild of the collapsed structure at massive personal cost. He didn't consult headquarters, he didn't calculate losses. He just told the foreman that human lives came before schedules. The press caught the story and ran it as a positive feature. His father called during the broadcast, initially furious, then quiet, then unexpectedly proud. After the interview aired, the Go family started receiving partnership inquiries from companies they'd been courting for years. The chairman summoned both sons and announced Changbom as executive director. Chang-suk had opposed the land deal from the beginning. He'd called it a lottery, dismissed it as recklessness. The chairman made clear that was exactly why it wasn't him being promoted. Chang-suk was told to clear out his office. He didn't go quietly. He leaked a story claiming Changbom was an illegitimate son. The accusation spread online before anyone could contain it. Yunsung called Changbom. "Don't hit him," he said. "I have a better move." Changbom held a press conference and presented a DNA test proving his biological lineage. Then he stated carefully that there had been a child born from an affair, but that child had not survived. The implication was clear to anyone who knew the family history. Chang-suk nearly put his fist through a wall. In private, their father confirmed the truth to Chang-suk that the family had known, had kept the secret, and had given him every chance anyway. Chang-suk broke down. He hadn't realized until that moment how much he'd been given, and how thoroughly he'd wasted it. He left for the airport. On the way out, he asked Changbom directly, "Was it really a high school kid at JID?" Changbom just smiled. Chang-suk laughed from a distance and said, "You bet on a high school student, you deserve the company." Yunsung was already focused on the next phase, transferring to Seoul for his final year, specifically to Daesongmai High School in Gangnam, the Golden Circle's most active territory. If he transferred there as the top-ranked student in the country, they couldn't ignore him. They would have to act, which meant they would have to expose themselves. Before he left Daesun, he handed authority over to Sin Woo, the blonde friend who'd trained alongside him all year. Sin Woo proved the transition was real by fighting every bully who challenged the new order, winning every single one. Yunsung also made sure his brother Hyun-jin was enrolled at Daesun Science High, a separate school with a teacher he trusted. In his first life, that teacher had been fired for protecting a student. In this one, Yunsung made sure his brother's presence was backed by Kang Group authority. When a wealthy student named Byung-gu threatened Han-jin, Yunsung arrived, had the boy's father on his knees, and made clear exactly what the cost of touching his brother would be. Byung-gu kneeled and apologized in front of the entire class. Hyunjin's world changed overnight. Seniors wanted to meet him. He became quietly famous. Meanwhile, a business deal Yunsung had arranged months earlier paid off enormously. He'd identified land near a planned government reconstruction zone, using information from Senator Panho, and had Changbom purchase it quietly. When the government officially announced the Sejong reconstruction project, the land value exploded. The board of directors unanimously confirmed Changbom as the next chief executive of Kang Group. Before Yunsung left Daesun, students he barely knew came to find him. The chubby kid he'd defended on his very first day, the one who'd refused to testify at his committee hearing, came to apologize with a different kind of honesty. He admitted he'd been a coward, and that the normal life he'd been living since was only possible because of Yunsung. Other students followed. Kids from other schools he'd never met found the forum page and posted. Yunsung told them not to confuse his selfishness with kindness. He hadn't done it for them, he'd done it because he needed to. But standing there, reading those messages, watching those faces, something shifted in him. He thought about hate, about whether it only ever made more of itself. He didn't have an answer. He just knew that when he threw out the trash, people became happy, and someone had to be willing to do that work. He arrived at Daesongmai High School in Gangnam with a target on his back before he'd even introduced himself. The Golden Circle knew he was coming. They'd read the reports from Daesun. They knew about Changbom. They knew about the mole. They gave their school-level enforcers 1 month to neutralize him. On Yunsung's first day, a student named Dong-soo sat across from him and deliberately hit himself in the face, then dropped to the floor screaming that Yunsung had attacked him. His friends immediately backed the story. The teacher, already primed by the circle's people, accepted it. Yunsung watched the whole performance with quiet recognition. He'd recorded everything. He called the police himself from the teacher's lounge, in front of everyone. A detective arrived and within minutes the lies unraveled, but Yunsung knew one detective wasn't enough. He needed something more durable. He hired attorney Park Jong-soo, a former prosecutor who had sacrificed his career fighting corruption and gotten nothing for it. Jong-soo was skeptical, then intrigued, then increasingly committed the more he understood what Yunsung actually knew. The school suspended Dong-soo and his crew. Yunsung went from being someone to fear to being someone the entire school needed to avoid. But the circle didn't stop. Their S-rank enforcer at the school, Choi Mong-hun, was a different category of threat. He was talented, experienced, and operating with full institutional cover. Teachers, the vice director, even the local police had been arranged to stand down when he moved. He'd been brutalizing a student named Kang Jae-wook for years, systematically destroying the boy's grades and confidence, because a powerful parent had paid for it. Jae-wook had ranked first his freshman year. That made him a target. Jae-wook found Yunsung and told him everything, not asking for help, just hoping someone with enough courage existed. The Golden Circle arranged their final move a day with no teacher interference, no police response, nothing. Mong-hun assembled his crew on the rooftop and waited for Yunsung to arrive. Yunsung had anticipated exact this. He fought through the stairwells alone. The circle's people hit him with a knife midway up and he kept climbing. He walked onto the rooftop bleeding, facing Mong-hun and his full crew. They really fought, no holding back on either side. Mong-hun was physically superior. He landed blows that should have ended it. Yunsung kept absorbing them and swinging back. A subordinate with a knife appeared behind him. Jae-wook screamed a warning from the doorway. The blade caught Yunsung across the arm. He barely managed to stay upright. He turned, delivered a knee strike to the attacker's skull, and looked back at Mong-hun. "Is that all?" he asked. When the teachers finally arrived, forced by the weight of too many witnesses and too much visible evidence. The scene on that rooftop was the circle's nightmare made real. Yunsung stood injured, surrounded by people in far worse shape. He told the teacher to call ambulances and the police, because this time, they weren't going to be able to make it disappear. The school's administration tried anyway. They convened a disciplinary committee, presented a fraudulent medical report, claiming Yunsung had caused a dental damage to a student, and voted to expel him. Yunsung didn't leave. Jong-soo filed an appeal the same day and requested a stay of execution, citing a stack of prior Golden Circle cases, where the same trick had been used, and where courts had consistently allowed students to remain enrolled pending review. The vice director tried to refuse the stay. Jong-soo asked calmly if she wanted to be the first person to overturn every one of those precedents. She went quiet. Yunsung went back to class the next morning. Outside, Sung-pil, the anti-school violence committee leader who had lost his own son to bullying, was holding a press conference on the sidewalk in front of the school. Journalist coverage followed. The Department of Education launched an inquiry. Congressman Panho's name appeared in the headlines, tying his image to the story of a student fighting for justice. The circle's school-level operatives found themselves unable to act without risk of global exposure. The vice director, quietly panicking, told Mong-hun's handler to find another way. There was no other way. The school was locked. Meanwhile, Yunsung's broader trap had been sprung at a higher level. Months earlier, he had identified several high-ranking Golden Circle members through Young Chan-soo's intel and Mong-hun's contracts. Using Panho's political funds as the delivery mechanism, Yunsung had quietly funneled money to those members, making them look like they'd accepted bribes from within the circle's own network. When the tax authority opened an audit on Kang Group's construction arm, those same members were forced to act. They called off the audit to protect themselves. In doing so, they revealed exactly who they were and what they were protecting. The circle's internal leadership began consuming it itself. The executive who had been managing Yunsung's case was being squeezed from multiple directions, by an exposed client, by a flipped mole, by a lawyer who wouldn't back down, and by a congressman whose name was now publicly attached to school justice. A proxy from the upper tier of the circle met with the executive and told him to handle it whatever the cost. The executive agreed, and then quietly realized there was nothing left to agree with. Yunsung had also flipped the Gold for Circle's local transfer agent, Cho Taijin. Taijin had come to Daesun months earlier as an assassin, a circle-trained B-rank operative assigned to Channel High. Byung-ho and his crew had beaten him until he couldn't think straight. Then the homeroom teacher had slapped him for threatening a teacher. Then Yunsung had locked his arm in a hold, and told him very quietly what would happen to his sister if he didn't cooperate. Taijun became Yunsung's mole within the Circle's enforcement network. Back in Daesan, Sin Woo was handling the Golden Circle's cleanup team operatives sent to threaten Yunsung's family. One of them was caught staking out the apartment where Yunsung's brother lived. Sin Woo and the youth council caught him, documented everything on security footage, and handed the police an airtight case. Changbom's people ensured the arrest stuck. The Circle's executive, furious, tried to pressure Kang Group, directly sending an intermediary to lean on Changbom over coffee. Changbom grabbed the man by the collar, threw him into a table and walked out. Jiangsu was facing simultaneous professional complaints from multiple bar associations, a coordinated attack on his license. He called up his old prosecutor friend Kong Dongcho Lee Miso's husband, the deputy chief prosecutor, and handed him a full documented history of Golden Circle operations. Dongcho read through it in silence. He thought about his son's tutor. He thought about what kind of prosecutor he wanted to be. He picked up his phone and told his staff he needed them in his office in the morning. Yunsung's classmate Jae-wook, the one who'd been Mong Hun's long-term victim, wrote his own statement to the Department of Education. He wrote that he was done standing by, that things needed to change, that if a senior like Yunsung could face all of that and keep walking forward, then Jae-wook could at least refuse to disappear quietly. Yunsung, for his part, had one last piece of unfinished business from Daesan. Young Minho, expelled, relocated, trying to rebuild a life somewhere new, had been drawing the Circle's attention again. Yunsung had arranged for a Circle enforcer to find and systematically torment him in his new city. The enforcer was methodical, creative, and relentless. Minho eventually attempted suicide, jumped from a building, survived, landed in a hospital. The enforcer was arrested. The testimony and evidence against him was overwhelming. Yunsung visited Minho in the hospital room. He held the boy's hand and told him quietly that he'd prayed on the way over. Prayed Minho was conscious, so he could hear this. "You should have given up," Yunsung said. "Watch you struggle was entertaining. But I won't keep that promise. If you wake up, we'll meet again." He left without looking back. And then from a supermarket, buying eggs for his brother, he saw OG. She was wearing a hood, moving fast, terrified of being recognized. She was walking on her own 2 feet. The injury her father had faked to protect her reputation was never real. She'd spent months pretending to be disabled, isolated, afraid of Yunsung catching her out in public. He watched her go and said nothing. He told Changbom later, "She's made her own hell. Let her stay in it." The first semester exams at Daesongmai were approaching the Circle's formal deadline. Teachers had been running a low-level harassment campaign in every class, calling Yunsung out, piling on written punishments, trying to provoke a reaction. He handed in a reflection note that was actually a detailed catalog of every bribe the teacher had accepted, and a question about whether the Department of Education had already received a copy. They had. The teacher ran from the room. The harassment campaign collapsed immediately. The Circle's executive tried one final approach, pressuring Changbom through a tax audit on Kang Group. The audit was real and it stung, but Yunsung had anticipated it. He had already funneled money from Panho's resources to high-ranking Circle members in Kang Group's name. When those members received funds that could be traced to a construction company under audit, they panicked and called off the investigation to protect themselves. In calling it off, they identified themselves to Dongcho's team. Changbom, facing his father's disappointment and the company's instability, stayed steady. He told the chairman directly, "This is the kind of president I want to become." The chairman, rather than throwing his son overboard as the Circle had expected, became protective. He told his board that Kang Group's foundation wasn't clean, and that a company of their scale could weather an audit, but only with the right leadership. Changbom stayed. The Pixisol proxy delivered a warning to their executive to stop the audit immediately. The executive, who had started the audit himself to destroy Changbom, was now being ordered to undo it. The trap had closed from every side. The exposed members, high-ranking, powerful, suddenly very visible, had no choice but to surface. Yunsung had known their names for months. He'd read them from Chansu's leaked files. Congressman Kyung Cho, whose 20-year political career was built in part on Circle money, was now on Dongcho's investigation list. The case that would eventually be called the Golden Gate Scandal was beginning to take shape. Yunsung knew from his first life that the scandal would eventually break, but that the full member list would never be revealed. The top tier would fade quietly while the lower levels took the punishment. He wasn't going to let that happen the same way twice. The deputy chief prosecutor, the anti-violent senator, the most reliable investigative news outlet in Seoul, all of them were moving. All of them were connected to Yunsung's network, and none of them fully knew how tightly. Yunsung walked the terrace of Daesongmai and looked out across the city. He wrapped bandages around his hands, trained too hard again. Always trained too hard. He thought about what he'd built, who he'd used, what it had cost. The teacher who'd covered for him, now terrified and compliant. the principal who'd been bought, now dreaming of national rankings. Changbom, who had genuinely changed, who had become the person his father had always hoped for. Jinwoo, who had never wavered once. His brother, who would never know the full extent of what had been done to keep him safe. His grandmother, who deserved better than a grandson who'd spent his second life engineering the destruction of powerful men. He thought about the boy who'd come to him in the supermarket parking lot to say thank you, the one who said that because of Yunsung, he'd been able to live. And for the first time in 2 lives, Yunsung allowed himself to feel something other than fury, not peace, not pride, something quieter and harder to name. The Golden Circle had operated for decades because good people looked away. Parents who called it kids being kids. Teachers who filed nothing. Police who accepted that this was how things worked. A system so thoroughly corrupted that one boy had to come back from the dead just to find the edge of it. Kim Yunsung hadn't arrived at Daesung Mai to graduate. He'd arrived to end something, and he had built every piece of that ending by hand. One backer at a time. One debt called in at a time. The money had always been a tool. The fighting had always been a message. The real weapon was information, knowing what everyone wanted, what everyone feared, what everyone had done. He'd spent 10 years collecting that knowledge in a hospital bed, unable to move, and he'd spent 2 years spending it, one carefully placed card at a time. Changbom once asked him, sitting in the same cafe, where this all started, if he'd always known it would work out. Yunsung said no. I just knew what happened the last time I did nothing, he said. So I wasn't going to do nothing again. That was the truth of it. Not power, not a perfect plan, just a person who had already paid the highest possible price for passivity, and refused to pay it twice. The teachers at Daesung Mai who had tormented him would face the Department of Education's inquiry. The executive who had tried to destroy him would answer to the circle's own upper leadership for his failures. Monghun's arm would heal. But the record of what he'd done to Jaewook wouldn't disappear. Jaewook himself would keep attending class, still shaken, still rebuilding but present, writing his own name into the record instead of letting others erase it. Dongsho would pursue the Golden Circle through proper channels, slowly, methodically, in ways that would hold up in court. It was the kind of work that took years, but it was started now. And it was started because one teenager refused to vanish quietly into the school's machinery. Jong-soo would face down the complaint campaign against his license, and for the first time since leaving the prosecutor's office, feel like he'd made the right choice. Chona, the girl who had lost her brother and wanted to become a prosecutor herself, watched all of it unfold and made her own decision about the kind of power she wanted to build. Not violence, law, durable, patient, sustainable law. Yunsung had told her bluntly that she wasn't ready to walk his road. She told him just as bluntly that she wasn't trying to. She had her own road, she just needed him not to lose first. He said he'd root for her. He meant it. His grandmother never knew the full shape of what her grandson had built. She knew only that he came home sometimes looking tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix, and that he always sat down for dinner and asked about her day like nothing was wrong. She knew the apartment she'd moved into was better than the one she'd sold to pay hospital bills. She knew her grandson was hard-working and good, and that she was proud of him. She didn't know about the 10 years, she didn't need to. Some things are carried alone so that other people don't have to carry them at all. On the last day before winter break, Yunsung walked out of Daesung Mai for the final time as a current student. A new student he'd never met stopped him near the gate and said, "I heard about you. I just wanted to say thank you." Yunsung looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Don't thank me. Just make sure whoever comes after you doesn't have to do what I did." He turned and kept walking. Behind him, the school was already different from what it had been when he arrived. The circle's hold on Daesung was broken, not cleanly, not completely, but broken. The gaps they'd counted on the teachers who looked away, the administrators who could be bought, were closing, not because the institution had suddenly found integrity, but because someone had made the cost of corruption visible, specific and undeniable. That's what Yunsung had done in 2 years, made the invisible cost visible, made every adult who chose silence look at what their silence had cost a real person, made every powerful family who had treated cruelty as a service they could purchase understand that someone was keeping records. The Golden Circle would not fall in a single moment. It would fall the way corrupt systems always fall, slowly, then all at once. But the process was now in motion, and the people moving it forward were real. Not heroes, not perfect. A disgraced ex-prosecutor finding his spine again. A deputy chief prosecutor who chose not to look away. A senator who lost his son and spent years trying to build something from that grief. And Kim Yunsung, who had died in a hospital bed, came back breathing, and spent every moment of his second life making sure no one else had to endure what he had. He wasn't gentle about it. He wasn't kind in the traditional sense. He had grabbed people by the throat, made fathers kneel, broken bones, and engineered financial ruin. He had used the same darkness the circle used: manipulation, leverage, fear. and turned it outward, at the people who had invented it. Whether that made him righteous or just effective, he had honestly stopped caring. He knew what he was, he knew what he'd done, and he knew that every student walking those hallways without being hunted was walking there because of choices he made. That had to be enough. He crossed back into Daesun on a cold afternoon in the last week of winter. His brother was waiting at the apartment, had cooked something badly, and was pretending it was fine. They ate together. Yunsung didn't mention Seoul. Hyunjin didn't mention the bruises. They just sat there, two brothers at a table their grandmother had picked out. And for one evening, the weight of everything lifted just enough to breathe. Yunsung thought about the 10 years, about the ceiling of that hospital room, about the sound of his grandmother's voice telling him to wake up, about the exact moment he'd realized that if he ever came back, he wasn't going to waste it. He hadn't. Every choice had been deliberate. Every alliance had been built with purpose. Every enemy had been broken in a way that served the larger goal. But, sitting here in this small apartment, with this badly cooked food, with his brother's voice in the background, this was the part he'd actually been fighting for. Not revenge, not the fall of the golden circle. This, right here, a normal evening that his grandmother could afford to have. A brother who didn't have to be afraid of going to school. A life that looked, from the outside, almost ordinary. He had paid a price for all of it that most people would never understand, and he would pay it again without hesitation. Because the version of Kim Yunsung who had lain in that hospital bed, the one who heard everything and could do nothing, had made one promise to himself in the dark, that if he ever got another chance he would make it count. He kept that promise in every room he walked into. He kept it in every alliance he built and every enemy he dismantled. He kept it every time he chose to stand between someone helpless and someone powerful, and he would keep it through every fight ahead in Gangnam, through every move the circle had left, until the last card in his hand had been played. Kim Yunsung had been thrown off a roof, spent a decade dying slowly in a body that wouldn't move, and returned with nothing but memory and intention. He had built a network of protection from scratch, dismantled a criminal organization from the inside out, and done it all before graduation. He was not a hero, he was a consequence. The consequence of every adult who had seen something terrible happening to a child, and decided it wasn't their problem, and the world around him was finally, slowly, starting to understand what it meant to have a consequence like him. The Golden Circle had survived for decades by betting that no victim would ever fight back hard enough or smart enough to matter. Kim Yunsung had spent 2 lifetimes proving that bet wrong.